Okay, so we'll be looking at the theory of interest rates. Okay, the theory of interest rates. And in this system, when we are talking about interest rates, we are talking about the rates that brings lenders and borrowers together. Okay, in other words, this is the rate at which the quantity of money that both individuals, firms, and then the government wishes to lend will be the same as the interest rate that the same economic units are willing to borrow. Okay, so if you have an idled money, you will lend it out. Then those who also need money for their economic transactions, then they will come and borrow. Okay, so people do lend because they want to attract interest on their funds, and then people do borrow. Here we are assuming that we borrow to invest. Okay, so the cost of borrowing is the interest rate, and then the benefit of lending to is the interest rate that we are talking about here. Okay, good. Okay, and then the market where the interest rate is determined is called the loanable funds market or the bonds market. But for this level, let's just stick to the name loanable funds market. So if you do money and banking, you'll be looking at the bonds market. But let's stay with loanable funds market. Okay, so here, those of us or those who wish to lend will send their money to this market, and then those who wish to borrow will also go to this market to get access to funds to do their investment. Okay, to do their investment. Okay. So if we have to be comparing the loanable funds market and the bonds market, what it means is that if you want to borrow, it means that you are selling or you are issuing out bonds. Okay, and then if you want to buy bonds, then it means that you are giving out the idle money that you are not using, money that you can spare. Okay, so when someone tells you that I'm going to buy bonds, okay, we have government bonds. So if you are going to buy bonds, it means that you have some money that you are not using now, but you don't just want the money to be idle. So you go buy the government bond, and that means that you are lending the government what funds. Okay, so that's how the thing works. You borrowing means you are selling bonds, and then you buying means you are giving out um, your money. Okay, right. So that is that. And then in economics, by now we all know that whatever markets that we talk about, goods market, capital market, labor market, money market, whatever market that we talk about, we have two sides. We have the demand side and then the supply side. Okay, when it comes to this market, all the economic entities that we know, government, firms, and households, they form the demand side, and then they also form the supply side. Okay, so this means that when you go to the market, those who are giving out their idle money are what the firms, households, and then the government. And at the same time, the firms, the households, and the government, you can go to this market to go and borrow the idle funds. Okay. All right. So this is the demand side, and then this is the supply side. Okay. So here, when the SSLF stands for the supply for loanable funds, okay, and this is the same as the savings function. You giving out your funds means that you are saving, okay. It means that you are saving. Let's not even talk about the bonds. Okay, so when you want to supply loanable funds, it means that you are saving. So whenever you see the savings function, just know that we are talking about the supply function for loanable funds, okay. And in likewise manner, the demand for loanable funds is taken as the investment function. Okay, as I said earlier, we are assuming that people borrow, economic entities borrow just to invest. Okay, they borrow to invest. So when you are demanding loanable funds, then it means that you are going to use the money to invest. So in any question, when you see the investment function, then that's the demand for loanable funds function. Okay. All right. The assumptions under this. We are assuming that at equilibrium, okay, at equilibrium, the supply and the demand for loanable funds should be the same, okay, and we are holding an assumption that the market is always in equilibrium. So if that's the case, then the quantity of funds that the entities are willing to lend should be the same as what the entities are willing to borrow, okay. And also, let's really take note of this point. Interest rate is free to move about. It can either go up, it can either come down. When you go to any, if you go to the goods market, okay, we take price as what brings buyers and sellers together. Here too, that is the interest rate. Okay, so the price in the loanable funds market is what the interest rate. That's if we have to talk about equivalence. So goods market is price, and then the loanable funds market is the interest rate. Okay, so whenever you have excess demand, you realize that with a constant supply, price should go up. Okay, so when you come to this market, to whenever there's excess demand for funds, then the interest rate must go up in order to bring the market back to equilibrium. Okay, and then also when there is excess supply, then the interest rate must fall. In other words, price must fall just to make sure that the market is back to equilibrium. Okay, so this free movement of the interest rate, the free movement of the interest rate means that there can be changes in the AD function, okay? But whatever change that comes outside the model, we call them the exogenous changes. If the change is not from the model, then it doesn't really affect the level of aggregate demand. It will just change the components, just that the real value of AD will never change. In a short time, you will understand what we are talking about here, okay? If you take aggregate demand, I'm sure we will remember these are some of the components. We have investment, consumption, government expenditure, and all those things. Okay, so what we are trying to say is, even if there's a change in government spending, okay, if there's a change in government spending, aggregate demand will not change. It will just cause changes in the other components of aggregate demand. We'll see how that works with that diagram very soon. Okay, but let's just hold on to this. So these are the two assumptions that we need to hold. Interest rate can freely move, and then the market should always be in equilibrium. Okay. In case you have a question, you can alert me. If you think I'm moving too fast to dance, you can alert me.
Hello, sir.
Audrey.
Please, I don't understand the last point. This flexibility in the interest rates, yes, that pass.
This one, yeah, don't worry, just give me 10-15 minutes, we'll get there, and then you understand what you see that interest rate affects investment, right? So assuming there's a change in interest rate, there's supposed to be a change in investment, which means that aggregate demand should change. But what we are trying to say is aggregate demand will not change. It won't change, okay, but it's just going to change other components. So just assuming we have only investment and consumption as components in the aggregate demand function. If there's supposed to be an increase in investment, then it's going to cause a decrease in consumption in equal proportion, which means that the level of AD is not changing, but the components are changing. The levels of the components are changing, but it will have no real effect on the level of AD. Audrey, don't worry, we'll get there soon, okay? All right. Okay, so we want to look at the schedules for the demand and then the supply for loanable funds, okay? Assuming there's a high interest rate, okay, with a very high interest rate, the basic assumption here is that people lend out their idled funds because they want to get what? They want to get interest on it. And the interest that they'll get on their funds depends on the level of interest rate, okay? So whenever interest rates are high, people are going to be enticed, they are going to be encouraged, forced even to say so, to, give up more of their idle funds. Okay, so whenever interest rates are high, people tend to lend out more money, which means that there's a positive relationship between the amount of money that people are willing to lend and the interest rate. As a result, there's supply for loanable funds. I'm sure by now you know almost all supply for whatever good that we are talking about and normally moves upwards. Okay, which means that there's always a direct relationship between price and then supply. Okay, so here, whenever interest rates are high, then people will be willing to lend out what more funds. Okay, and then for demand, I said earlier that the cost of borrowing, the cost for demanding loanable funds is the interest that you pay on that funds, which means that when interest rates are too high, it means that whenever you go for those funds, you are going to pay a higher interest on when you are paying back, which will discourage you. So at a higher interest rate, the economic entities are discouraged from borrowing, and because of a high cost of borrowing. So there's a negative relationship between the demand for loanable funds and then the interest rate. Okay, so that one moves downwards. Okay, so these are the curves. This is the supply for loanable funds. And if you remember, we said the supply stands for the savings function. The savings function. So the savings function is a positive function of interest rate. Okay, positive function of interest rate. And then this is for the demand for loanable funds. And we said that one is investment. So investment is negatively related to interest rates. Okay, right. So when we bring them together, their intersection gives us what? Gives us the equilibrium point. Okay, and this will give us the equilibrium interest rate. And at this point, savings should be the same as what? Investment, which means that the amount of funds that people are willing to lend is the same as the amount of funds that people are willing to borrow. Okay, so that is that for the equilibrium. Okay, so this one is when we put the two together. Okay, any question? Any questions so far? All right, so let's move on. When we talk about the equilibrium interest rate, we are just talking about the interest rate that will equate savings to what? To investment. In other words, it's just going to equate the supply of loanable funds to the demand for loanable funds. Okay, and when we bring the government in, okay, when we bring the government in, it's not just investment that is seen as the demand for loanable funds, but whenever the government is spending and the spending is being financed by buying of bonds, okay, by buying of bonds, then that one too becomes part of the investment function. Okay, so the demand side of the loanable funds market becomes the summation of uh, investment and then the bond finance government deficit. So the J minus T here stands for the government trying to finance a budget deficit through the buying of bonds. I'm sure you know that when the government wants to finance a deficit, it can do this through bonds, demanding bonds, or through printing of money, or through tax. Tax. He can just control tax just to control consumption. Okay, but in a case where the government chooses to finance the deficit through uh, demanding for bonds, then that's what we are talking about. It becomes part of the demand for loanable funds function. Okay, it becomes part. So if that's the case, then it means that at equilibrium, the savings will not only be equal to investment, but it should be equal to the summation of investment and then the bond financed government deficit. So let's look at this diagram. Okay. Initially, we said that this is where the equilibrium was supposed to be at. This is the investment function. This is the savings function. So we're supposed to have our equilibrium here. Okay. But now, because we have the G minus T, the demand for loanable funds curve has shifted to the right. And as a result, this is where the new equilibrium is. So here, S is not just equal to I, but it's equal to the summation of I and then J minus T. So the vertical difference between these two curves is the J minus T. Okay, is the J minus T. I hope we understand. And please learn how to draw these curves because you really need it a lot. Even if the question involves mass, you normally be asked to use the diagrams to give an interpretation of what will be happening, the dynamics that will happen in the question. Okay, so learn how to draw the curves. Okay, right. So that is that when we add the bond finance government deficit. All right. Okay, so now please let's listen attentively. Okay, we want to look at how autonomous changes in investment can affect the interest rate. Okay, how it's going to affect the interest rate. So just assuming that initially this is the equilibrium point. Okay, we're here I0 and S. Okay, so here is the equilibrium point, and this was the equilibrium interest rate, and as a result, X0 was the same as I0. Now, there's an assumption that there's a reduction in investment. Okay, there's a reduction in investment. Investment has decreased, so now this is the new investment curve. So this is the new equilibrium. Okay, this is our new equilibrium. So does this have a real effect? Is it going to change aggregate demand? Because if investment should fall, then yes, aggregate demand should fall because investment is a component of uh, aggregate demand. Okay, so that's what we want to look at here. Now, this distance, the distance from here to here, is the change in investment. That's why we represented it by what? Change in I. Okay, the change in I. So now this is where we are. Okay, so now because there's there's a decrease in investment, it means that there's a decrease in the demand for loanable funds. Okay, and as a result, it's going to put a downward pressure on interest rate. Now people are not demanding for loans. So even if you put your money in the market, I mean, it wouldn't attract much interest. You understand? Now we don't really need your money for investment, which means that if you force people to come and borrow, you need to encourage them to come and borrow by reducing the cost of borrowing. That's the reason why interest rates will fall. So this is going to be the new what? Equilibrium point. Okay, this is going to be the new equilibrium point. But now the question is this going to affect aggregate demand? That's what we want to look at. Okay, but if investment falls, then we expect that aggregate demand should fall. But is that what is really happening here? Now, when investment falls, just assuming there was a fall in investment, and there was no fall in interest rate. Okay, this is where the level of investment will be at. I'm coming. Let me draw a line. Okay, assuming there was hey. Okay, so this is where the level of investment will be at, assuming there was no decrease in interest rates. Okay, but now this is where investment is. Why? Because there's a negative relationship between interest rate and investment. When interest rate falls, then investment is supposed to increase again. I'm taking it again. Investment fell from I0 to I1. Okay, so now this is the new investment curve. Okay, and I'm saying that just assuming there was no change in interest rate, then this is where the level of investment will be at here. Okay, this is what we would have gotten. But now there's a fall in interest rate from R0 to what? R1. And we know that whenever interest rate fall, there's an increase in investment. I hope we agree that whenever there's a fall in interest rate, there's an increase in investment. Do we agree?
Yes.
Good. So now, because of the small fall in interest rate, there's a small increase in investment again. There was a okay. Let's use numbers. Just assuming that I'm coming. Just assuming the change in investment here was say 10. Okay, the change in investment here was 10. It was a decrease, so let's use minus 10. Okay, but now assuming initially the interest rate was 6. Okay, so we had a decrease of 10 in investment, but now the interest rate has decreased to say 4. Whenever there's a fall in interest rate, investment should increase. So assuming there's an increase of 4, investment has increased again by what? 4. That is this distance from here to be here, what we denoted B. Okay, so because there's a bit fall in interest rate, there's a bit increase in what? Investment, offsetting the initial decrease in investment. So now the decrease in the total decrease that we have here should be 6, right? Because this increase in investment is taking part of this initial fall away. Okay, good. Now, what is happening to savings? Because of a fall in interest rate, we said that there's a positive relationship between savings and the interest rate. So when interest rate falls, then savings too should fall. Savings will fall a bit because of a fall in what? The fall in interest rate. That is this distance, the A falling from here to here. That's why the new S1 is this line. Okay, so from A, from this point to this point, denoted as A, is the fall in savings. Just assuming that fall is 6. Okay, but just know that whenever there's a fall in savings, it means that there's an increase in consumption. When you have your money, it's either you consume or you save. So when savings should fall by 6, it means that consumption is increasing by what? By 6. Is that okay? What we are doing is we are trying to see whether there's going to be a change in aggregate demand whenever there's a change in investment. Okay, so assuming AD is just giving us investment and then consumption. Okay, investment and consumption. And now investment decreased by 10 units. That's the initial decrease, okay? But because of the fall in interest rates, it increased again by what? By 4, okay? Good, so let's see what is happening to consumption. Because of the fall in interest rate, savings decreased by 6 units. And if savings is decreasing by 6 units, it means that consumption is going up by what? By 6. So we can say that consumption has increased by what? By 6. Then you realize that there's no change in aggregate demand. Okay, there's no change in aggregate demand. When you add this 4 to this, it will just cancel this 10 out. Okay, so what this is trying to say is, whenever Audrey, this is what that point was talking about. Okay, whenever there's a change in any of the components of aggregate demand, it doesn't affect aggregate demand. Okay, the only thing it affects will be the components of aggregate demand. There's going to be changes. This one, the initial change was coming from investment, but I see that it has affected what? Consumption, which is also a component of aggregate demand. But the real value for aggregate demand didn't change. Is that okay? It didn't change at all. So whenever there's a decrease or you can do this for an increase in investment, the analysis will be the same thing. Okay, so whenever investment changes, aggregate demand won't change, just that it's going to affect consumption. Okay, so it only affects the components, but for aggregate demand itself, there's not going to be any change. Please, do you understand? Do you understand? Hello?
Yes, please.
Okay. Abba, do you understand?
Yes, please.
Adwasewa?
Yes, please.
Audrey? Audrey Niama? Audrey Mensa?
Hello.
Do you understand?
I'm not really clear about the graph. The graph is not clear to me.
Should I take the literal meaning or the literally meaning? Is it that you can't see or you don't really understand what is happening?
I can see, but I don't understand.
Okay. Okay, then let me go over again. Okay. And so pay attention. Don't unmute yourself. And I'll be asking you questions. Unmute yourself. Audrey. Audrey.
Yes.
Don't mute yourself. Good.
Okay.
So this is what I'm saying. We are starting from this point. We want to look at how autonomous changes in spending affect the aggregate demand. Okay, and we know that aggregate demand, the components of aggregate demand are what? Consumption, investment, government expenditure, and all that. Okay, so what we are trying to say is whenever there's a change in investment, how is it going to affect interest rates? How is it going to affect equilibrium investment and savings? How would that change affect the aggregate demand function? Okay, so we are starting from here. Audrey, this is the initial equilibrium point, okay? So the initial investment is the same as what? Savings. So that's what we have here. And now there's a fall, okay? There's a fall in investment. So we've moved from I0 to what? I1. From I0 to what? I1. So that's what we have here. This distance is measuring the change as denoted by change in I, change in investment. Change in investment, okay? Change in investment, good. So we said that the investment function is what? Is the demand for loanable funds function. That's the demand for what? For loanable funds. When you are in any market and demand falls, price falls, right? Price falls, okay? So because investment has fallen, this is the new equilibrium point. And you see what is happening. There's a fall in what? Interest rate. There's a fall in interest rate, okay? But the dynamics will not end here. Because of a fall in interest rate, it's going to affect investment again. Whenever investment falls, we tend to what? Whenever interest rate falls, we tend to invest more. Okay? Whenever interest rate falls, we tend to what? Invest more. So there's going to be an increase in investment. Okay, that's from here to here. It won't be so big to offset the initial decrease in investment, but at least it's going to take part away. So the initial one was this distance from this point to this point. That's if we add both A and B from here to here. But because the interest rate couldn't stay at R0, it has decreased to what? R1. And as a result, there's a small increase in investment from this point to this point. That is the B that we have here. Okay, this is the interest in increase in investment. Because interest rate has what? Interest rate has fallen. So this is a small increase in investment, which means that now the only reduction in aggregate demand is the portion A. It's just the portion A. Was the B, the latter increase in investment has taken this part away. Audrey, are you with me?
And the brain, please,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Okay, Ella.
But why don't we draw another investment curve, like to pass through the
Okay, let's use demand. Let's use demand. When there's a change in price, do we draw a new demand curve or we move along the demand curve? Ella, if there's a change in price, do we move along or we draw a new one?
we move along.
So that's exactly what we are doing here. We're here, right? But because of a fall in price, a fall in interest rate, we are moving along the investment curve.
Okay, so the next one is down there. Okay.
I hope you see it now.
Thank you. Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, good. So we'll move from here to here. If the interest rate didn't change, then this is where we're supposed to be at. But because of the decrease in interest rate, we'll move along the investment function. So we'll come here. So this whole part is being taken off. Okay. Audrey, please, do you understand? Audrey.
Yes, please.
Okay. Then we move on to this portion.
Yes.
We move on to the A portion, okay? We move on to this side. See, initially this was the level of savings, right? And we said that the savings function is a positive function of what? Interest rate. So because there's a reduction in interest rates, we'll move along what? The savings function.